Hello, Brother Monroe here. Welcome back to I Had Thoughts bouncing around my head, so I needed to make a video to get them out. Or, if you prefer, my alternative defence investment plan, because I got bored of waiting to read the real one. If you don't know what I'm talking about, back in the summer of 2025, the British government released their new Strategic Defence Review, looking forwards, all very fine, very nice, full of lots of fancy buzzwords, but there was no actual detail in what they were wanting to actually purchase to make any of the stuff they were talking about possible. And this was all put off into something called the Defence Investment Plan. It was supposed to be published at the end of 2025. It hasn't. It is now being pushed back to after the Easter recess, which could mean any time. And what this is basically actually setting out what the British Armed Forces will buy. Now, you've maybe seen my How to Fix the Royal Navy video, which I did very quickly because of the whole HMS Dragon thing. I've taken all the comments on that video, I've gone away and I've thought about it, and I've realised I'm pretty much getting into doing a full defence investment plan myself anyway, so I might as well do it. So, apologies. If you did see the Royal Navy video, I will be going over some of the same stuff in here, but I have changed my mind about some of it. But if you want to skip ahead to the sections where I talk about the RAF and the Army and how it all mixes together, do feel free to skip the Navy bit. Anyway, what is this for, this video? So a lot of the comments on what the Royal Navy needs is, understandably, people are saying, oh, this is fantasy fleets, there's no money, they would never do this, etc., etc. And I understand that viewpoint. So what this plan is for is not me saying this is what will happen. It's not me expecting this to happen. I would be very, very surprised. So we've got a little kind of scale here. Over here we have the current force, what we currently have available, which is pathetic. I don't think there's any argument about that. We currently have only one Type 45 destroyer, HMS Dragon, and she had to be rapidly pulled out of a maintenance, or have a maintenance period scrapped / accelerated. Get her ready. It took about a week, even though it was months of work or weeks of work. And Type 23 frigates are almost rotting away as they do their jobs. Like the Navy in particular has almost nothing, and this does extend to the other services as well, particularly the Army. We'll get onto them in a minute. This plan is, well, I'll get on to what assumptions I made later, but this plan is looking quite far ahead. We're looking out to, sustained defence investment for many, many years, up to kind of 2050. And it's kind of a yardstick for if the government is serious, because the actual defence investment plan will probably sit somewhere along here. So if it looks like the current force, then it's just all hot air and business as usual. If it's closer to this plan, then the government's actually being serious about their aims. So, what is my aim for this? Well, I've looked at the 2025 Strategic Defence Review, and I have taken what it says. So, my aim for this plan is for the UK to become NATO's primary North Atlantic or Euro-Atlantic or whatever you want to call it, reinforcement power with a little bit of global strike capability, but primarily this is centred around NATO, as in, say, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, potentially getting attacked. That's a very likely scenario. And the UK can step in as a reinforcement power. So we can go in and we can help It is not about making Britain a superpower. It is not about restoring the empire and singing Rule Britannia in every corner of the globe. All it does is it's trying to make Britain a force that ensures that NATO can actually fight a war in Europe, in all the domains. And the 2025 Strategic Defence Review has these three kind of requirements for the UK Armed Forces. Defend the UK and all the weird bits of the UK that are scattered across the globe. So that is, think Falklands 2. Could we fight a Falklands style campaign? Not necessarily the Falklands campaign, of course, because we'd rather avoid that. But, you know, say something happens to the Pitcairn Islands or something, right? Do we have the ability to defend those far-flung bits of the UK? Do we have the ability to defend the UK itself, which is something that often gets kind of dismissed in strategic defence reviews, because a lot of them in the past have assumed there would be no threat to the UK itself, which is really silly, because the UK as an island nation, we import a lot of stuff, and if that ability to import and export is damaged in any significant way, we are in trouble. We are in serious trouble. This has been true in the First World War. It was true in the Second World War. So we need to be able to secure our sea lanes in and around the UK, as well as the far-flung bits. We need to deter and defend in the Euro-Atlantic. That is the terminology from the Strategic Defence Review, which, to my mind, means exactly what I was talking about earlier. If there is a land war in Europe, can we, in a meaningful way, intervene on behalf of our allies? This is a scenario that the UK, Great Britain, England has had to worry about for centuries. You don't have to look very far in our history to find loads of examples of us having to do this. World War II, World War I, the most obvious examples in the 20th century, but you've got loads of examples in the 18th century and earlier as well. This is something that the British need to be able to do. The Peninsular War, for instance, would be an example of this, where we, had to land a force in Portugal to shore them up, and then later moving into Spain, help liberate them from French oppression. And if you are a Yes Minister fan, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because Britain has fought with basically every power in continental Europe against every other power in continental Europe at some point. It is something that we have had to do for a very long time. And then the last one, shape the global security environment. That is just, we're not going to worry too much about that. It is more that we are not over-specialising in Europe, that we still have some ability to, do stuff on a global scale, because, of course, we have allies on the other side of the world, Australia, New Zealand, to name two, Japan, South Korea. There are allies over in the Pacific. There's allies in the Indian Ocean. The UK has global interests and allies all over the place that we would like to be able to help. My addition to this is availability over peak power. And the point of this plan is to make sure that we can, according to the Strategic Defence Review, deter and prevent a full-scale war by being ready to fight and win said war in a NATO-first manner. So we actually have to be able to fight a war and win a war in order to prevent it, which is sound strategic thinking, because if your enemy thinks you are weak, they are much more likely to attack you. And I am prioritising availability over peak power throughout this. This is not about a sudden burst of energy when we've had a load of time to prepare for it. Think the invasion of Iraq in 2003 as an example. Okay, this is about being able to fight a war that you did not choose. So the UK Armed Forces can already fight a war that they have loads of time to prepare for, get everything in position, extended plan. No, this plan is more about, no, we don't know what will happen, and we need to be able to respond to any threat as it pops up, which means we have to evaluate our risks. And the biggest risks are attacks on and sea lanes to the UK, to and from the UK, land war in Europe, presumably Eastern Europe, but could be anywhere in Europe, or someone going and attacking us miles and miles away, and someone attacks New Zealand or something, right? Whatever it is, we need to be able to deal with it. And it's not about prestige. This is about effect. It's not a perfect force by any means, but it is a usable one. And our strategic role within NATO under this plan is pretty clear. It is secure the Atlantic sea lanes of control, enable the reinforcement of Europe, deny Russian maritime breakout into the Atlantic, and provide high-end enablers early in a conflict. And that last one is important because the real worst-case scenario that I'm planning for here is there is a land war in Europe, presumably Russia, whilst something is going on in the Pacific region, aka China. So if China and Russia coordinate, and they are both causing problems. So China ties up the US in the Pacific, and then Russia attacks into Europe, hoping that the US can't help quickly because all of their rapid forces have already gone to the Pacific. The UK is where NATO has another option. Not as good as the US, I want to stress that. Nowhere near the numbers or power, but enough for, a month or two to hold out and help the Eastern European powers hold on until more reinforcement can come from the US, or France mobilizing, or Germany mobilizing, and things like that. So we're going to make some assumptions. The first one is that the UK defence spending increases to 3.5% of GDP as soon as possible. I basically assumed that we will do it now because we should. But the current promise, and take this with an enormous grain of salt, is to get to that level by 2035. NATO would like everybody to spend 5%. This plan is very, very possible under a 5% defence spend. But I have tried to stick within that 3.5% of GDP budget. And if we did that right now, that would be about £110 billion per year on defence, which is not quite, but almost double the current budget, which is sitting around 2.5% of GDP. I would probably change how they do the accounting so that we aren't lying about how much we spend on defence, because a lot of things get rolled into defence spending that never used to be rolled into defence spending, so that it doesn't look quite as bad as it is. But anyway, I'm going to assume 3.5% of GDP going into actual defence spending, not just pretending that it does. And that funding level is maintained right through to 2050. So this is what the British Armed Forces could look like by 2050. Now, some bits can be done a lot quicker, but I'm trying to be realistic here. 2050 is a fair way away, nearly 25 years. This is a long-term plan, because you need long-term plans in defence. And the second assumption that I made, which is probably the biggest one, is that the government of the United Kingdom, and that can be of any political party, because they're all equally bad on defence, arguably, is that the aims and stuff set out in the Strategic Defence Review, which I just went over, are actually what they're trying to do. They're not just saying they want to do it to sound good. We are actually going to do what they said they wanted to do, which is a very dangerous assumption in politics and government, but that is what we are going to do. So let's start with the senior service. I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly than I did in the other video, so don't worry about that. And I have tweaked the numbers a little bit, but this is based on the following. So we are trying to make the Royal Navy a second-tier global navy with a Euro-Atlantic focus that has a carrier strike group, a nuclear deterrent at all times, and one amphibious brigade available at all times. And if you think that sounds crazy, this is what that looks like. So we've got an Invincible, an Albion, Bay class, I think that is, and then a couple of escorts. So a couple of frigates or a destroyer and a frigate. That is kind of what you'd be looking at. That's it. It's really not a lot. In a high-intensity conflict, this force is not enough to continue its global commitments. It would have to focus to convoy protection in the North Atlantic. It can't do everything at once. It can only really sustain one high-intensity conflict at once. I'm not going crazy here, I promise. But what it is based on is the harsh reality, no matter how much, navies around the world have tried to make this better, is that if you want in peacetime one ship deployed, say we want this ship here, we want to make sure that we always are able to have one of those going off and doing its job, protecting the carrier. Well, to do that, you need to have 4 of these, because this one, being deployed, needs another one working up, or training, to replace it. It needs one to be the ship that this one replaced, which is now winding down and going into kind of more regular maintenance, and one that will be in deep maintenance or refit. So you need 4 of this to have. So for this picture, you need to multiply all of these ships, apart from possibly this one, by 4. So that is where the numbers are coming from, which I go into in a lot more detail in the How to Fix the Royal Navy video. But you don't have to watch that to understand what I'm going to talk about here. It's just a harsh fact of military warships, especially British warships, which are operating up in the North Atlantic a lot of the time, north of Shetland, up, kind of around the Faroe Islands, up into, Greenland, Iceland, and over towards the northern Norway, northern Russia. It's a very harsh, cold, wet, salty, high seas, high winds. The ships really take a battering, so you need that kind of constant maintenance. So how many do we need? Well, let's go on to crewed systems first, because, of course, lots of talk about hybrid navy at the moment. First off, nuclear submarines that fire nuclear weapons. This is already underway. The Dreadnought class, we need 4 of them. They're building 4. Yes, good, excellent. They're very, very expensive. But, I have no problems with this. I seriously doubt this will be changed in the actual published Defence Investment Plan. Dreadnought is supposed to be started quite soon, now that the last Astute class boat has been finished. So that's all progressing okay as far as I know. Now, I said 4 to 6. I would prefer them to build an extra 2 boats equipped as SSGNs, so with conventional missiles, for various reasons, but the main ones being that gives you an extra 2 hulls to spread out the wear and tear over, and it gives you the option to, a bit of subterfuge, or you don't know if it's the nuclear one or a conventional one, if you have both out at the same time. And it means that these very expensive boats have a non-nuclear role, which means they could be used in a conventional conflict rather than just the hopefully most likely scenario of these ships never ever firing their weapons in anger. So it makes the spend a little bit more palatable. However, I don't think that is strictly necessary. And I'll come back to why I'm probably going to have to drop those 2 extra boats. But it's not necessary because the regular attack submarines, the AUKUS ones, a recent filing in the US has revealed that these will indeed have the launch tubes just aft of the conning tower. So they will have the ability to fire Tomahawk, presumably, land attack missiles. Possibly they might be able to fire Stratus as well. And we are planning to build 12 AUKUS boats. Now, I would prefer that we try to build 16 AUKUS boats, but the reality is Barrow, which is where we build all of our submarines, probably cannot cope with building more than they have planned. So the 4 dreadnoughts and then the 12 AUKUS boats, I think is a good expansion. That's going up from 7 Astutes to 12 AUKUS. That is good. However, I don't think it's enough, especially if we're not getting those SSGNs as well. So if we've got 4 ballistic missile submarines and 12 nuclear subs, that means we have 1 ballistic submarine out at once, and we have as many as 3 or possibly 4 attack submarines, nuclear ones, which is a lot better than what we're able to manage at the moment, which is 1. However, I personally don't think this is enough submarines. So let's get on to possibly the first controversial thing that I'm going to propose, and that is buying conventional submarines, air-independent propulsion ones. And there are lots of options here, but Britain has not operated conventional submarines since the Oberon and Upholder class. We don't have anywhere that could produce a conventional submarine apart from Barrow, which is obviously going to be busy building nuclear submarines. So what I would recommend is having a chat with our friends and allies, the Germans and the Norwegians, who are currently looking to operate the Type 212CD, which is quite a big boat, but significantly smaller than the AUKUS boats. So AUKUS boats are 9,000 tons. They're really big. These things are more like 2.5. So they're much, much smaller, therefore much, much cheaper. They're also simpler because they don't involve a nuclear reactor. And the reason I think we should buy 8 of these, and I do have a plan for how we would do this, is to reduce the burden on Barrow and Furness. So they are only having to build 16 submarines by 2050, which I think is pretty generous. That's like 1 every 2 years. But if we also got some diesel submarines, effectively, we would then be able to keep probably 2 of these available at any one time, which means we're up to 5 submarines total. And these ones, the conventional subs, these are designed to operate in the North Sea and the Baltic, but mainly the North Sea, which is perfect for the Royal Navy. And it would give us boats that are basically tied to the UK, and the nuclear boats would be the ones that we could send off far and wide, and it would free them up to do that. We wouldn't feel the need to keep one of the AUKUS boats necessarily close to home. We can rely on these, and it will give us significantly more submarine power because we would have 20 attack submarines rather than 12, which is what's currently planned. A little bit of a swerve, the Royal Navy operating German U-boats effectively, but I do have a plan on how we could actually eventually build these in the UK, and I'll get on to industrial strategy later. Next, the second controversial thing, carriers. We only have 2, the Queen Elizabeths. For various reasons, I am not a fan of the Queen Elizabeth class at all. But my main problem is we only have 2 of them. which means that often we effectively have none of them. Because, like for instance, right now, neither Prince of Wales nor Queen Elizabeth is actually at sea doing stuff. They are both in port. Prince of Wales is due to do stuff later this year, but effectively, right now, the Royal Navy has 0 carriers. And that is not acceptable if we are planning for a scenario where war could happen at any time and we need to be ready for it. Well, we're not. We would need like months probably to get both carriers even close to ready. We could maybe get one out in weeks if we were lucky. So, using the rule that I laid down earlier, we need a minimum of 4 carriers. Now, you could try and build 4 Queen Elizabeth class carriers, but goodness me, are they expensive and enormous. So, no, I personally would not do that. We are going to prioritize availability over sortie generation. And the other advantage of 4 carriers is in a wartime scenario, you have force dispersion. You're not concentrating everything into 2 units. You have 4 of them. So there is a bit more redundancy, a bit more in the way of graceful degradation of the force. So I think something more like an Invincible class would be perfectly sensible. Something around 40,000 tons-ish, that kind of size, operating 18 F-35Bs off a ski jump. Ski lift would be amusing. Operating off a ski jump. And 24 if needs be, surge capacity. And for that, you need to buy about 110 F-35Bs, which is about how many we're planning to buy anyway, or at least it was the last time I checked. We don't currently have enough planes to even use a Queen Elizabeth class carrier to its full effect anyway. We since having them, we have never used them fully. We have effectively operated them like a much smaller carrier, but they're huge and expensive. Really a total... they just went off on one with those things. Anyway, so we need 4. And I would say smaller carriers are better. And we need to buy the planes for them, which I think has to be the F-35B. Potentially, if Tempest has a short takeoff vertical land option, you could put on Tempests instead, but I don't think they are planning to do that with Tempest. So F-35Bs it is, and we'll come back to the F-35 later. But 4 carriers means we would have one. We would have one. We would be able to send it wherever we needed to send it, whenever we needed to send it. Very, very useful to have. Next is amphibious ships. There is a plan for these. This is the Elida Strike version or proposal from, I think it's BMT, for the multi-role strike ship, which is a cross... So there's a well deck at the back, in case you're wondering. So it's got a well deck. It's got a big platform for 2 Chinooks. Not that it would carry Chinooks, but you could land 2 Chinooks on it. It's got kind of containerized storage in the middle, and it has a VLS battery up front, not a particularly big one. And you can see here there's a Dragonfire laser self-defense. So it's kind of it's a combination of a bunch of things. It's basically got some limited self-defense capability. It's an amphibious ship. It's designed to drop off troops. But they are very useful in peacetime as well, because you can also get people offshore with these things pretty well, in case you need to evacuate people from, say, Lebanon, which has happened in the last 20 or so years, and might end up happening again. Very useful type of ship. Now, this type of ship is not used as much as a warship, so you probably don't need to build as many. I would go for 6, personally, assuming that half of them will be available or deployed at any one time. So that's 3 of them, which fits very nicely with what I'm going to talk about next, which is the Royal Marines. Currently, They are in the midst of reorganising the Royal Marines into the Future Commando Force. Very fancy. I would not upend that. But what I would do is I would restore the Royal Marines to brigade strength. It's very unlikely that you would need to deploy them as a brigade, but you could if you had 6 of these things. But what I would do is I would take 42 Commando. They're currently being used for maritime security role. I would change them to the same role as 40 and 45 Commando, which is a, what are they called, littoral response group or littoral strike group or something like that. Basically, the idea is you have a company of Royal Marines on this ship, and we would have 3 of these ships and 3 companies of Royal Marines, 1 from each commando battalion, and ready to go and do marine stuff, which is very, very handy. Or, if it was a full-scale thing, like Falklands 2, you could deploy the entirety of 3 Commando Brigade, and it would actually be at brigade strength. That means the maritime security needs to be taken over by someone else, and I would suggest reactivating or reforming for 1 Commando, which is a historical unit. So we bring back 4-1 Commando to take on the maritime security role, and then 40, 42, and 45 are all going off and doing war things, units. And in theory, 3 Commando Brigade could be deployed as an entire brigade to secure a beachhead. Very useful capability for NATO to have. Obviously, the American US Marines can do that, but I don't think many European powers can do it. Maybe the French can. But to have this option available in the North Atlantic, or based in the North Atlantic all the time, very, very handy. Very handy indeed. So that would be a real kind of marquee feature that we're providing to NATO. Well, we've got to keep all this stuff safe. This is all the high-end stuff. So we need some destroyers. Here is our current destroyer fleet in its natural environment, tied up alongside because it's broken. The Type 45, of which we have 6. A pathetic number. The Navy, I think, originally wanted 15 of these. I think we need 16, which means we always have 4 destroyers. Then they were persuaded, no, that's too much. You can only ask for 12. And then various successive governments cut that down to 6. First to 8 and then to 6. That's not enough. You shouldn't have bothered building them if you're only going to build 6. It made them way too expensive for what they are. So there is a replacement for the Type 45s in the offing. This is the Type 83, or the Future Air Dominance System, because we love talking about systems of systems these days. But yeah, minimum 12, preferably 16 of these systems, which hopefully includes an actual destroyer. And I think in the time frame we're talking about, so probably these being built in the 2040s, they should have between, I would say, 64 and 80 VLS cells per ship, which is noticeably more than the Type 45s, but is not trying to build an enormous destroyer stuffed full of missiles like the Americans do with the Arleigh Burke, or even the Chinese with the 055, the one with 100 cells in it, which is basically a cruiser. So pulling back from making them as big as a cruiser, this is for budget reasons, by the way, I would rather have 12 slightly smaller destroyers than, say, 6 enormous ones with loads of missiles. Because the ship can only be in one place at a time, and we need to be in lots of places at once. Well, I say lots of places. If you build 12, you can be in, 3 places at once. And if you think about it, 3 places at once, well, we probably would like one in the Eastern Mediterranean right now. We probably need to keep one at home because, unless I'm missing something, destroyers, the Type 45 is Britain's only ballistic missile defence system. And then you have one able to go and join a NATO standing maritime group. So it's really not. It's basically keeping up our obligations. Really small. But I would settle for 12. I would prefer 16 of these things. ASW frigates, we obviously need these because of our position, geographic position. This is one of the Type 26s. I think this one is Cardiff, going under the Queensferry crossing. Yeah, we need 12 of these. We're currently building 8 and 5 for the Norwegians. We should really look to build another 4 on top of that. And I'll talk about where and how we could build that later, because that would impact the Type 83 production line. Next, and I know ships don't have production lines, just bear with me. Next, we have general purpose frigates like the Type 31. We should really be building 12 of those, not 5. So I very much hope that the Defence Investment Plan, when it comes out, is talking about Type 31 Batch 2 or Type 32 or whatever they want to call it. The Rosyth shipyard, which is building these, is getting close to having the 5th one being started. So they really need to know what they're building next. So this is probably the most urgent thing in terms of new procurement that I would be really hoping to see, is them upping the order for the Type 31 up to around 12. There will be export orders for Arrowhead 140, probably. But yeah, we should really be building these for ourselves, because these things are 300 million quid and these things are closer to $1 billion. They look similar on paper, but the Type 26 is an incredible piece of engineering, very complicated, internals to be super quiet. The Type 31s are built very simply with simple machinery, and they cost way less, but they do pack the same amount of firepower. So these things are really good. They were a good idea to build these, but we need more of them. We can't just have 5, because 5 means we're really only having the capability of 1, which is pathetic. Now I'm going to move on to stuff that has not been talked about at all in current plannings, and that is a corvette. The European Patrol Corvette, I think, is a very interesting option. If you have the Type 31, these are about 7,000 tons, I think. Corvettes, these would be close to, 3,000 tons, 3, maybe 4. They're basically miniature frigates. So they have all the systems a frigate would have: sonar, radar, a gun, multi-purpose gun, a VLS battery, and some close-in weapon systems, and a helicopter. Very useful. Basically, an even cheaper version of the Type 31. Small. If we had 12 of them, that's another 3, 4 escorts that are less obviously, say, force escalating than sending a frigate. So you send a corvette, it's just a little corvette. You could park one of these in the Falklands easily enough, and that would be a serious deterrent without also being too scary for Argentina. It's obviously not powerful enough to do anything offensive, particularly, but a ship like this could easily escort merchant vessels through the Red Sea, for instance, because you could quad pack their VLS cells. They're not going to have a lot, maybe 16 cells, but quad packed with Sea Scepter missiles, that's a lot. That's a lot of missiles. That's enough to escort a ship through a contested strait where there are potentially missiles being chucked at you. And they can defend themselves in those sorts of areas. So you can do maritime patrol in less safe areas. And I would build 12 of these, so noticeable expansion in the escort fleet. And I would also have the Defence Investment Plan absolutely must include replacements for the Type 1 River class OPV, offshore patrol vessel, pictured here. Because these ships are approaching their retirement. They don't look like much. They are incredibly lightly armed. The batch 1s. The batch 2s are not much better, although they can at least take a helicopter on the back of them. They don't have a hangar. So I think whatever offshore patrol vessel is designed, I think at minimum it needs to have a helicopter on it. Or the ability to have a crewed helicopter. Obviously, you might prefer to put on the new, what are they called, Peregrine drones instead. But the hangar needs to be big enough to take a Wildcat, basically. And a gun on the front and some self-defense weapons. Particularly if you go for something like the Bofors 40 or a 57mm, those can also be used to shoot down, well, in theory, they can be used to shoot down missiles. But they can also be used to shoot down drones, which is mainly what I would be wanting to use it for. So they have some ability to defend themselves against a one-way attack drone, cheap one-way attack drone. They can shoot it down with their main gun, maybe stick a couple of Dragonfire lasers on them, so they can defend against drones very, very cheaply. They can deploy a helicopter. They have a little bit of radar. They have a little bit of sonar. They are very, very useful in peacetime because they have quite high availability. You can use them to board sanctioned Russian oil vessels and stuff like that. But they're not completely defenseless. And they have a little bit of offensive capability. You could even stick some naval strike missiles on them. If there was a war, you could have the option for putting naval strike missiles on them. So I think we need 12 of these. They have slightly better availability than the more complicated warships. So you could probably have 6 of these available at any one time, which is great. Probably sounds about right. And then, lest we forget them, these things, Cutlass class. We need these as well, little patrol boats. There's usually one in like Gibraltar, and most ports have, naval bases have one of these things. They're extremely useful, not just for kind of pottering about and doing stuff, but also for giving officers kind of a route to command. And I don't want 12 of those. I don't know why I said I wanted 12 of them. Let me fix that. There we go. We want 20 of these things, not 12. 20 of them. Cheap option. They don't cost very much. Let's build 20 of them. I did have a brief bit of whimsy in that you could have these as sailing ships and buy some Oyster 495s, but no, we'll stick with the sensible Cutlass class type ship. Yeah, probably need about 20 of those. I would like to see those in the defence investment plan. I doubt that it will. This is small enough that it could be kind of done outside the usual kind of big spending cycles. Right, uncrewed systems. The current First Sea Lord is very hot on uncrewed systems, and probably become obvious why in a moment, because all these crewed platforms, good as they are, they're really only a small force. We'd be deploying a carrier, the amphibious ships, escorted by 1 or 2 destroyers, a Type 26, a Type 31, and maybe a couple of corvettes. We're not talking about a lot of stuff here. This is where the uncrewed systems come in. So the first uncrewed system that I think would be very, very useful to have, or rather optionally crewed, because I think that's a much better way round of doing this, is to have this thing. This is the Type 91 proposal from, I think, BAE, the Trimaran one. But you want to have a VLS sloop, effectively. And this is your expendable magazine layer. So the idea being you have your Type 83, and it has a little squadron of these things with it that fire their missiles first, and once they're empty, they can just sail back to port, reload in port, which is way easier than trying to do it at sea, and then come back out and meet up with their destroyer again. If they're in uncrewed mode, it doesn't, there's no crew on board. It doesn't matter as much if they get blown up, so you can use them as forward pickets and stuff like that as well. This is what gives you your magazine depth and your mass in a potential naval conflict with a peer navy, something that the Royal Navy is currently not equipped to deal with at all. Useful little thing. I would prefer them to have direct line of sight control rather than relying on satellites, because that's bad. But the current moves in this area do seem to make sense with this sort of design. Optionally crewed, controlled by a destroyer, expendable magazine layer. Great. Probably need about 40 of them, possibly more, depending on how many you want each destroyer to have with it. Because these things are mostly going to be sitting around, not being used all the time, because you don't need to. They can stay not in storage, but effectively sitting there, just ready to be used if needs be. Then we have the Submarine Detection Force. For some reason, the Royal Navy have gotten into their heads some weird Soviet ideas, like putting missiles on the carriers, defensive missiles on a carrier, sure. Offensive, it seems ridiculous. An Atlantic bastion and all this stuff. Anyway, the idea of a submarine detection force using this type of thing, this is the XV Excalibur, which is an uncrewed submarine with a sonar on it. That's literally all it is. It's like a mobile sonobuoy. Yeah, great. Put these out into the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap and out beyond towards Russia. Very useful indeed. No idea how many you'd need of these. Probably a lot for what they're talking about. Assuming they can be made relatively cheaply, you could have lots. They don't need crew on them. But what you do need is a ship to service these things. So a ship that can come along, yoink them out of the water, fix them up, and do maintenance, check their computer logs directly, things like that. I think that is supposed to be the Type 93, but I'll come back to that because I have an idea for how the Navy could build a ship to kind of service these things, as well as the VLS sloops. And the last one, which is uncrewed system, although this is HMS Stirling Castle, mine countermeasure systems. Probably one of the areas where I actually think the Royal Navy is... They've got a bit of a capability gap right now, but they are going in the right direction. So the idea is to build ships like this, the Stirling Castle, which is not a military ship, it's a civilian ship that the Royal Navy bought. These are your mine countermeasure system motherships. The mine countermeasure system itself is a bunch of little uncrewed boats and subs that this thing can deploy and service, but you can actually just send out the uncrewed bits on a plane. So you put them on a plane, you can fly them out to a naval base and just put them in the water and operate them there while you wait for one of these ships to come along. These ships are required if you want to do deep water stuff. So if you're not operating from the coast, if you want to go further out. They can also be used for other things, like keeping an eye on submarine cables and stuff like that. But I believe the current plan is to buy 8 of these, which is great. That is how many I think we need. So Stirling Castle at the moment, and then we've got the MHC Mothership Block 2 and Block 3. Block 2 has, I think, 3 ships in it, bringing us up to 4, and then hopefully Block 3 will have 4 ships in it, or 4 systems, I should say. 8 mine countermeasure systems that can be deployed anywhere. That is extremely useful. Assuming that these have better availability because they're not full-on military ships, we'd have 4 systems operating at the same time, potentially. So you could have one doing the North Sea Channel. You could send one, or you could deploy one over to the Red Sea. You could deploy another one to the Gulf, and then you could have another one off to go somewhere else, like Australia or the Philippines or something, right? Very, very good capability to have. Very useful for the Alliance. So, yes, I would definitely stick with that. We then move on to the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, who... I'm going to assume here that we have close to commercial levels of availability. So, if I say we're going to build 5 ships, it means we probably will have 5 ships available, because these are built to commercial standards, not necessarily military standards. They're not used as in quite the same way. They're, pootling about at cruise speed most of the time. They're not flogging around at flank speed. And all of these ships potentially have a lot of peacetime use. Well, I'll come back to that in a minute. But the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, they need a pay rise. Give the Royal Fleet Auxiliary a pay rise, please, for goodness sake. But what ships do they need? I think we need 8 of these things. This is a Tide class. We only have 4 of them, I think. We need 8, for sure. And particularly with this expanded fleet that I've been talking about, where I've basically doubled the number of ships, you need to double the number of tankers so that they don't run out of fuel, because none of them are nuclear powered. Sad, but probably more practical not to try and make a nuclear fleet. Yeah, we need more of these things. Tide class is pretty good. Build again, please. Same again. Good stuff. We then have the solid support ships, which have just started being built. I think the plan is for 3. I've doubled it up to 6 because we've doubled the number of ships that we need. Seems like a solid design. I don't really have any problem with these. Both of these types of ships are commercially quite useful. If they are not needed for some reason, although I think they would be with these sorts of numbers, you can, and the RFA has, charter these out for private enterprise to use. You can charter these ships out. So if these ships are sitting out, and this goes for basically all of the RFA ships, if for some reason they're not needed, you can contract them out to other interests. So you need something refueled quickly. You could ask the RFA to send over a Tide class. You could ask them to send a solid support ship to go and do something. And this next ship, this is the Proteus, which is a survey ship. It looks very similar to the mine countermeasure mothership. This is an entirely new type of ship that I'm going to be talking about here. I think the Proteus would fit into this category because it has a lot of the facilities, but not all of the ones that I would want. I think it would be a kind of a cross between this thing, the Stirling Castle, and the multi-role strike ship in terms of what this thing would look like. But basically you need something to do repairs, aviation support, survey work, which is what Proteus is for, submarine tender, and uncrewed thing tender. The Proteus is pretty close. If you maybe lengthened it and moved the flight deck to in the middle and had a little hangar and some workshops, so you could take on board a Merlin, or maybe 2 Merlins, or Wildcats or drones or whatever it is to fix them up. And you've got a big crane for hauling in these things. This could also fulfill the role of the Type 9-3 uncrewed system support vessel. But you move that from the Navy to the RFA because it's hopefully not expected to be in combat. You can put kind of light defensive stuff on it, like the Solid support ship has a phalanx on the front, something along those lines. Self-defense weapons, something to shoot down some drones, basically. So this could share the hull with either the MRSS or the MCM motherships, or be a kind of mishmash of the two. But I reckon we need about 6 of these things. Again, with high availability, one will be off doing survey work, and the others would be servicing all of the uncrewed systems that you have floating about. And then, lastly, we have roll-on, roll-off sea lift ships. There are a bunch of these. This doesn't look like an RFA ship, but it is, actually. This is an example of ships that are contracted out permanently to charter, but for private companies. I personally would not do that. I would get some more of these. I think the RFA needs to have 6 of these that they can call on minimum, and assuming pre-positioning is going on, 6 is enough. Unfortunately, we don't have 6 of these anymore because someone got rid of some of them. Never mind. However, if pre-positioning isn't available, you would need 18 of these things for what I'm going to talk about when we get to the army. That means we need either 6 that the RFA actually own and 12 that are commercial ships that are contracted out, or just 18 ships that are built for the RFA but actually operated by private company doing roll-on, roll-off sea lift commercially. But we can call them up and get them all back. That carries with it risk. That's why I prefer to go for 6 that we actually have sitting around. Maybe they're not doing very much, but they're sitting around. And 12 that are leased out, so that we have some capability to move stuff around if we need to. Now, obviously, this is not all. The Navy needs big aircraft from land, but I'll deal with that when I get to the RAF. What about an industrial strategy? Because this is building a lot of ships. This is probably one of the things that has been missed over the last few years, and that is building ships is a very good way of investing in your manufacturing and industrial base, both in terms of facilities and in terms of people, and getting something useful out of it rather than just giving the money to private companies. Obviously you are giving money to private companies, but you are getting an asset back in return that you control. I'm planning on building a lot of ships. Currently, I would say that the amount of ships that I want to build here is not possible. That's fine, because we're looking out to 2050. And we can split things up. So Liverpool, that's Camel Laird's yard down here. You could have them building the MRSS carriers and other big ships like that, because they have some experience building those, and they are set up to do modular construction. So you don't actually have to build all the modules in Liverpool. You could build them elsewhere and float them in and put them together. But the important thing with all of these ports, and I'm going to be talking about all these shipyards, is that they need to have a constant drip of work. So Liverpool, you've got 6 multi-role strike ships to build and 4 carriers to build. That will keep you going all the way out to 2050, I'm sure of it. The Clyde, this is probably the only place that the destroyers can be built. It is currently being expanded up to facilitate building the Type 83s. If I want to build 12 Type 26s, that I don't want that impacting construction of the Type 83. Particularly now that we're going to have to be building the Norwegians Type 26 as well. So, if possible, it would be good to move the Clyde to building some of the frigate modules, but mostly focusing on building destroyers. And Rosyth, which is currently building the Type 31, is built up so that it can build both Type 31s or Arrowhead 140 derivatives or Arrowhead 120 derivatives, which are also being sold at the moment. They could also build Type 26s there. Now, I know Babcock don't own the Type 26 design, but, BAE is still being paid for their design of the Type 26, and then Babcock is just a contractor who's building them. And they're close, and you can kind of transfer the skills over. And so what you basically build up to do is Rosyth builds frigates, and the Clyde builds the destroyers. You also have Barrow in Furness. That's just here in Cumbria. They would be building all of the nuclear submarines. That is already planned. We can't overstress enough how much this is a big issue. This is why I couldn't put more nuclear boats through, because particularly with us being the source of the reactors for AUKUS subs, the Australian ones, Barrow is pretty much going to be at capacity the whole time anyway. So we can't really add anything here. And that means what I would do for the conventional submarines, the Type 212 CDs, is initially I would ask the Germans to build the hull, so the bit that Barrow would normally have to do. And then we do the fitting out down here in Devonport, which does have a submarine repair base. And they do the fit out. So they fit British sensors, weapons, comm systems and stuff like that to an already completed hull. And for the first few. And by the end of that run of 8 that I was talking about, you would build up Devonport to be able to produce them itself, but not to design them. We would be still relying on design authority from, I've forgotten who builds them, but the German company that builds the submarine. And then that takes you up to 2050, and then you would be needing to look to replace those 8 boats anyway, so you're building whatever comes next. And then the next class would be built in Devonport, albeit with a foreign design, and then the class after that you can have as a locally produced design. And then you would have full sovereign conventional submarine production down here, which would be very, very useful. Again, you have to think long term when you're doing this stuff. Appledore, which is here in North Devon, it's not the biggest shipyard in the world. No, I think Navantia own it. But it could build some of the sections for the MRSS or carriers, potentially. But mainly what I would be using it for is to build the corvettes and to build the OPVs. I think that's well suited to Appledore's kind of capabilities. Then you have Belfast, Harland and Wolff shipyard over here in Belfast. They're currently gearing up to build the solid support ships. I would use them as, well, mainly for building the RFA ships. But all of the more commercial type ships, you could maybe do combat fit out for the corvettes here. You could maybe build some of the modules in Belfast as well. But primarily I'd have Belfast producing the RFA ships. And then down here in Portsmouth, I think it's going to be pretty hard to actually build anything in Portsmouth. But you could upgrade the facilities there to do fitting out for some of the ships, so that you can move ships out of the Clyde or out of Rosyth or out of Liverpool and do combat system integration and stuff like that down in Portsmouth, just so that you don't run into bottlenecks. kind of use it as an overspill. So if, say, on the Clyde, they're like, well, we've got a ship ready to go into fitting out, but the ship we have fitting out isn't finished fitting out, so it's holding up the whole production line. You can go, right, well, move the one that's blocking it down to Portsmouth. We'll complete the fitting out down there. So it's also useful for repairs and things as well. I think that would work. It is bold. It would require a lot of money and many years of sustained investment, but that's good. I mean, especially if you look on the map at where that investment is going. None of it is in London. Very little of it is in the southeast, apart from Portsmouth, which is hardly the richest place in the world. A lot of it is further out. Industrial investment in outside of London is something that every government ever of the UK has sold as a good thing. So you can sell this to politicians and you can sell it to voters as, look, this is investment into infrastructure. This is investment into people. You're going to need a lot of skilled people. This is investment into education, into apprenticeships, into jobs. This is job creation. It's all good stuff, which is true, which helps. But you get something out of it. For the Navy to do this, again, remember I'm assuming that we are increasing the defence spending to 3.5% now. So I have about 50 billion extra to play with. I would say 20 billion goes into the Navy immediately a year. And an extra 10 is used on this stuff, industrial strategy. Because it wouldn't just be the shipyards. It would also be various factories elsewhere building stuff for the RAF and the Army. But, yeah, 10 billion tri-service pool per year for investment into infrastructure, construction, skills, people working in the supply chain, that sort of thing. And the Navy is going to get 20 billion. So they're getting more than everybody else because it takes so long to build ships and the Royal Navy is so run down. And I would argue, and I'm sure I'm going to annoy someone here, I would argue, historically speaking, the one service that the UK really cannot afford to be this bad. It has happened in the past and it has never ended well. We've ended up in a war that has cost us a huge amount of money, way more than actually having a navy that works would have cost in the first place. So it is just sensible to make sure that we keep the navy up. But they're not the only ones getting jam in this in this plan. So is the RAF. Now I'm going RAF next and Army last. Apologies for if you're eagerly awaiting the Army. The Royal Air Force, I spoke to someone who knows what they're talking about with the Royal Air Force, and I apologise that this is a bit jargon-laden, but modern air combat is complicated. So the aim here is to make a networked air power system. In fact, although I didn't talk about it much for the Navy, all three services are going to be using networked digital targeting web coolness. So what we want the RAF to be is a regional battlespace shaping force, not an air dominance force. I do not think it is realistic to expect the Royal Air Force to have the same overwhelming power as the US Air Force. That is just not happening. Even on a 5% GDP defence spend, I don't think we would be able to do that. So this is trying to be realistic. So we use a network-centric system of systems air warfare model optimised for short-duration, high-intensity access operations. So this is not, we have total control, we can do whatever we want, whenever we want. This is, no, we have to plan it, we can establish control temporarily, we can do what we need to do, and then we leave. So, it is optimized, this plan, for short duration, high intensity access operations. I said all that. But it has a maritime focus in the Euro-Atlantic. So we are, again, focusing down on what we're able to do. And this is going to have to deal with a contested electronic environment, electromagnetic warfare all over the place. But we do want a capability to maintain a reduced dependence on potentially stretched American assets during the initial response window, which is RAF speak for what happens if what I said earlier in the video happens. China is tying the US up in the Pacific. All the US high-end assets have gone over there. And then something kicks off in Europe. And NATO does not have immediately available the US AF. With this plan, the RAF can provide a little bit of those high-end force enablers for our allies for a short time, hopefully long enough for the Americans to turn up and assist. In terms of electronic warfare, I've kind of designed this around time-limited suppression of limited geographical areas. We are not going for sustained battle space control. This is a short window against defense, air defense systems, integrated ones. So I'm not expecting to be able to go waltz up and blow up anything I want in any country I want. And we're going to be using information superiority to make up for a necessary lack of platform mass, aka the RAF is going to have to fight smart, because they're not going to have thousands of planes that can carpet bomb the entire area. That is not possible. So you're going to have to do OCA and DCA missions as required. You're going to have to use uncrewed assets, mosaic warfare, another cool buzzwords, kill chain resilience, targeting redundancy, and distributed strike capability. You're really trying to use tech to make up for a lack of raw power, essentially. And I think that does fit with the kind of doctrine that's laid out in the Strategic Defence Review. I've maybe expanded it a little bit. But yeah, I'm not trying to build the USAF. It's not practical. So, combat aircraft, crewed combat aircraft, well, mixture, I suppose. Air superiority. We have 6 squadrons of Eurofighters, which are due to be replaced with, hopefully, 6 squadrons of Tempest, pictured here, flying over the Houses of Parliament, which is a hilarious picture for the RAF to produce. It's like, you don't cancel it because, look, it's flying over Parliament. How cool will that be? That means about 120 aircraft total. So, hopefully, Defence Investment Plan makes clear that Tempest is going to be a one-to-one replacement for the Eurofighter, and they're not going to do what they love to do and say, well, the new plane is vastly more capable than the old one, so we only need to build half as many. No, because the enemy is also getting more effective. So, no, you still need 6 squadrons of air superiority fighters. Please, for goodness sake. And I know Tempest is actually a multi-role, but primarily air superiority. We then need strike squadrons. This is where we have a bit of expansion. So currently the RAF shares F-35Bs with the Navy. I would give all of the F-35Bs to the Navy, and I would buy F-35As for the RAF. This is something that the current government has talked about doing, but the numbers are very, very shaky. I would look to build 5 squadrons of strike aircraft, which would probably be F-35A. Potentially, if Tempest has a strike variant, you could just build more Tempests rather than buying F-35As. But we've already invested in the F-35 project. We might as well get some blooming airframes out of it. We'd need about 100 of these. I don't think the government is thinking of buying 100 F-35s, but if they were being serious about actually introducing them to the RAF. That is how many they would order. So we've got our air superiority and our strike high-end crewed platforms. Loyal wingman drones are a very nice get. Oh, by the way, with the F-35A, they are also cheaper than the Bs and better than the Bs operating off runway, so they are an obvious upgrade over the B. But yes, loyal wingman. I think we have to get an electronic warfare option for the loyal wingman drones. This one, in case you're thinking, oh, these are miles away, this is future nonsense. No, this is the MQ-28 Ghost Bat that the Australians are building. And as you can see, this is a real picture. This is currently being tested. I would ring up the Australians, go, yes, that's very good. AUKUS, we give you nuclear reactors for your submarines, and how about we get some Ghost Bats, or an adapted version of the Ghost Bat, because they sound cool. But yes, you are going to use uncrewed loyal wingman drones. Very, very useful, particularly if we can get an electronic warfare option, because there is a big capability that is not included in this plan, which I'll get to later. Support aircraft, I've gone heavy on these because I think this is probably where Britain can offer kind of the biggest plus to NATO in Europe. We have some airborne early warning and control. We do not have enough. I believe we are buying 3 E7s. We need 9 of these aircraft, please, for goodness sake, so that we can guarantee having 3 or 4 available. And 3 or 4 is enough to cover Euro-Atlantic needs. Please do not just buy 3. Please buy more of. I know the Wedgetail is expensive, but for goodness sake, we're covering a vast area, the UK potentially, compared to our size. So yes, please buy more of these. They're very, very, very useful. Maritime patrol aircraft again. P8 Poseidon, very useful. I think we have 9. I would increase that to 12. 9 makes me... That's a little bit too low. Because if you... And again, another reason for buying 9 of these. If you lose one, then suddenly your capability is severely degraded, especially with only buying 3 Wedgetails. If you lose one of them, oh my goodness. And again, these numbers that are currently set out are not assuming a war with a peer adversary. They're just, they're assuming that it'll be always against someone who's inferior in every way. Well, you can't assume that anymore. You really can't. So, more maritime patrol aircraft, more strategic ISR rivet joints. I think we have 3 of them. Again, I've doubled that to 6. More of it, please. They're really, really useful platforms. You cannot just have 3 of the things. It makes me... no. I mean, what happens if one of them crashes? Which does happen. Someone crashed a B-2 Spirit. Stealth bomber ones. The expensive high-end planes do crash. Please don't only have 3 of them. Tankers, we currently have... I believe 9 of these and 5 extra ones sitting around in reserve. Again, I'm not too happy. Why does it say 12? Oh, I remember why. So I would buy 12 active, which means we would need 8 extras in reserve, so 20 in total. So expansion of the tankers, because obviously we're expanding the number of planes we have. We need to expand the number of tankers that we have. Transports, I think we need at least 30 of those, probably 8 of the Globemasters and 20 plus of the A400s. You need airlift for moving stuff. We're going to have more stuff. We need more transport. Simple. Another one that the RAF is actually thinking about, so hopefully will be in the Defence Investment Plan, is jet trainer aircraft. Replacements for the Hawk, which is what the Red Arrows fly. But you can reduce how many you need with simulators and stuff, but you do still need actual real aircraft for pilots to go and fly before they try and fly a Tempest, if you see what I mean. So fast jet trainer aircraft probably only need about 50 of these, but we do need them. I don't think it's an option not to get them. And then we have drones. We've got the Protector, and I forget the name of this one, the little one. Yes, lots of drones, please. I have no idea how many it's realistic for the RAF to operate, but they should be set up much as the crewed aircraft squadrons are, with full permanent squadrons operating remote aircraft. And I would also say, in addition to the strike and ISR roles that we already have, we really probably want to get an electronic warfare drone as well. A jammer drone or a listening drone or something. Right? We definitely expand the RAF drone operation because it's very small at the moment. And to do all that, 10 billion a year for the RAF extra on top of what they already get, which is basically doubling their budget. So I think this is all very reasonable. These are all platforms that currently exist or will exist at some point. I don't think there's too much risk involved here in expanding the RAF out. I haven't gone for anything crazy like bringing back a strategic bomber or anything complicated like that. No. Let's get more of what we have. We're headed in the right direction. We just need more of it, particularly the uncrewed systems, because uncrewed systems are going to be very important, like the Loyal Wing Mandarin. Last, but by no means least, the army. So you've been sitting patiently, and you're like, well, what about the army? Well, here is the plan. We're going to bring the army up to NATO heavy fighting standard, and we're going to try and address the horrific weakness in ground-based air defense that the army has. They basically don't have any, which is a big old worry when drones are a thing. And we're going to be substantially increasing the size of the army, which means we need to build out the support, logistics, and munitions elements first, and then we'll add the combat power later. So phase one of this plan is much more focused on building out support, logistics, munitions, etc. And a lot of that logistics stuff I was talking about in the Navy side of it, with sea lift transports, or the RAF with air transport. So we're building those out already. We're investing into industry. We're investing into munitions, stockpiles, and stuff like that. And the aim is to deploy one credible fighting division. That's all. Just one NATO heavy fighting division. If we are in a sustained high-intensity operation, we will require our allies' mass, which is a polite way of saying cannon fodder, and industrial resupply from wherever we are. So, yes, we can deploy one division quickly, and it can do things, and it can fight, and it can hold out for about a month by itself, pretty well, hopefully. But that is not conquer the world and turn it red coat red. That is not what this is doing. This is a very modest proposal, but it won't seem modest when we get into the numbers. So, here we go. A new force structure. So we have the UK Land Forces. We're going to up them to 100,000 regular troops and 40,000 reserves, which is a big expansion, but historically speaking, for the UK, it is not actually that large. We have had that size of army many times in the past when we had a much smaller population. Well, don't worry, I'll get on to recruitment. But if you're sitting there going, oh, how many troops are you going to, how many people? Yeah, 100,000 regulars and 40,000 in reserves. That is big. And under that, we will have, ambitiously, the first corps, which will be our warfighting headquarters unit. Here we go. This is not an actual corps. I seriously doubt it would ever be deployed as one, But in theory it is. So we can have a lieutenant general actually in charge of a corps. How cool is that? And means we can have a lieutenant general in the British Army without it seeming completely ridiculous. We could actually probably have two. I don't know how many lieutenant generals we currently have. It's probably like 28 or something. But we could actually have one lieutenant general whose job is, my goodness, I'm actually commanding a corps of troops, in theory, on paper at least. Within First Corps, we have First Division, which currently exists. That is the light, or I would call them motorised division. We'll get on to equipment in a moment. We currently have Third Division. That is our armoured division. That is the one that would actually go off and do the heavy warfighting. So we're going to designate that as our high readiness division. This is the one that would actually get deployed quickly or be pre-positioned in the event of a war in Europe. However, to maintain this and to be a credible fighting force longer term, because remember we are NATO's reinforcement power, we really need to be up to core strength, which means we need 2 more divisions of troops. And I would go for a 4th division, which is a copy of 3rd division in terms of structure and equipment and that. But this is the low readiness one. So this one, they're not ready to go. They're the lower readiness one. And you can actually rotate units between the two if you wanted to. And then we add 2nd division, which is a mechanized unit. Mechanized division. So this is, again, you're thinking in terms of a conflict. 3rd division goes in first because it's armoured. 4th division would come in soon after, and then 1st and 2nd are being deployed later to provide, reserve support. And then we have 5th division, although it wouldn't actually ever fight as one. We can have it as a division for administrative purposes. So you can have a major general of 5th division who will be in charge of all of the specialist cool stuff, like 16 Air Assault Brigade and 3 Commando Brigade. And remember, we've upped 3 Commando to be actually brigade strength. So there are 3 battalions of Royal Marines within 3 Commando. There would be 3 para battalions in Air Assault Brigade. I haven't actually checked how many battalions are currently in Air Assault Brigade. But, yeah, 16 Air Assault Brigade, 3rd Commando, and then all of the Special Forces units in 5th Division. So SBS, SAS, SRR, and all the other cool secret stuff. So all of that would become part of 5th Division, although that's not a real division that would ever be deployed. You just have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Probably only 3rd in most scenarios. Then you have 6th Division, which I think is really important. So this is all the support elements, so electronic warfare, cyber, security, signals, medical, logistics, all of that stuff, which is actually going to be embedded into the other fighting divisions most of the time. But as it is, I think they did have it as 6th Division. Now they've taken it out. I would put it back to 6th Division and put someone in charge of it. So again, you can have a Major General in charge of 6th Division whose job is to make sure that all of the support elements for the British Army are actually working as intended and in the right place. Good. And then 7th Division would be a collection of the reserves. Great. That is not a crazy army structure, I don't think, for the UK. That we basically have one division we can guarantee we can deploy, and if there was a really, really big conflict, we can deploy 4 divisions of troops, and we have some pretty cool specialist stuff, which is actually probably the stuff that get used the most often. So we have paratroopers. Well, not that they're used as paratroopers very often anymore, but we have air assault, we have commandos, amphibious, and we have special forces. We have all that cool stuff, but we can also do just regular old fighting, traditional armoured warfare in presumably just Europe. I would seriously doubt First Corps would be deployed anywhere except Europe. If it's an operation further afield, like, say, Iraq 2003 or the Falklands, you would only be deploying one of these. So if you run Falklands 2 back, you're sending 5th Division, effectively, and probably 1st Division, because that's more suited to the terrain of the Falkland Islands. And if you look at what happened in the Falkland Islands, that's exactly what happened. They sent the 3rd Commando and 5th Infantry Divisions. Those are the 2 that were sent. So here we will be sending 3 Commando and 1st Division. Simple. Okay, equipment. Oh boy. Tanks. No, that is not a typo. I think we're currently planning on buying 100 Challenger 3s. Thereabouts. No. For this force structure, we're going to need 400 plus, probably about 450 Challenger 3 main battle tanks. Yes. I can hear the treadheads in the comments section already. Yes, 450 main battle tanks. Realistically, for a heavy armoured division in NATO standard structure, if you want 2 of them, you probably talking 200 tanks plus for each and some spare. 450, pretty reasonable number, I would argue. That's a lot of tanks. So remember back where? Remember back here? I was talking about industrial strategy. We need a tank factory producing tanks all the time. So just as with the ships, what we do is, instead of buying a batch and then telling them, well, we've got nothing for you, sucks to be you, no, we get a tank factory going to build Challenger 3s, which, I mean, there already is one, but you tell them, no, we want you to produce, 20 Challenger 3s a month until we build Challenger 4, basically. And you do the same thing for all the other things. So you just keep them coming out so that you keep the skills, you keep the workforce, you keep the expertise in design and construction of these things. And maybe we would avoid issues that I'll get on to in a moment. Armoured personnel carriers. This is Boxer, so this would be primarily for 1st Division, the motorised one. There are many variants of the Boxer. I'm just lumping them all in together here. But you would probably need about 800 in this configuration, the armoured personnel carrier configuration, the one that's designed to carry a section of troops about, to equip an entire division, basically, and have some spare. Obviously, 1st Division is going to have boxers designed for command and control and ambulances and all that fun stuff. So, but I think we're currently planning on buying 600 boxers. So I have modestly increased that to 800 so that we can make sure that 1st Division is fully motorised. Because this to me is a motorised transport, because it has wheels. Shocking, I know, but it's not always how things are seen. Because the Warrior, infantry fighting vehicles, we need about 800 of those. And yes, don't worry, I'll get on to what's happening with them next. The upgrade pack for these was cancelled because we were going to have a new system to replace them all, except we're not, because we're not buying enough of them. So with 2nd Division coming into existence, we will need to build around 800 tracked vehicles. Let's call it Warrior 2 for now, to replace all of the Warriors for 2nd Division. As a temporary measure, you could take all the Warriors and you could give them to 2nd Division, although I really don't think the Warrior is any good in a peer-on-peer engagement anymore. I kind of like them. They're a fun vehicle, but without the upgrade pack, they are a little bit out of date. Just a little bit. Just a tad out of date. And need replaced. Which is where we need to talk about reconnaissance vehicles. We need about 600 of those. But a brief aside, or Ajax a rant. Ajax, goodness me. So I'm recording this on the 27th of March, 2026. Goodness me, Ajax. Oh my goodness. If you are not au fait with Ajax, it is a recon vehicle primarily, but obviously it can be built as an infantry fighting vehicle and all the rest of things, modular, this and that. Supposed to place a whole bunch of vehicles in British service, like the Scimitar and the Warrior and all these other things. During the competition to decide what to buy, what to build, the options were the Ajax, which is a development from the ASCOD, which is, I think, the Spanish IFV, and this is a CV90. It's from Sweden. CV90 would have been a perfectly sensible pick because it works. However, no, instead the MOD went with Ajax, which is about 10 years late, costs £6 billion, and has a tendency to liquefy the occupants. The vibrations and noise from these things. Bear in mind, this is supposed to be a scout vehicle, recon, aka quiet. Okay, I know they have a silent watchkeeping mode with batteries and stuff, but it does help if they're not enormously loud when they're moving. When it is like this, or like this, aka stopped, apparently the manufacturer thought it was a reasonable requirement that every time the vehicle stops, the crew has to get out and perform maintenance on the tracks. And no, I'm not joking. You can go and look up that news story, which came out, I think, yesterday or the day before. Someone actually said this. Someone who is very highly paid, I think it was actually a lieutenant general, which makes it even worse, that it was actually someone from the army saying this. There is a whole saga, there's a whole story about Ajax, but effectively, they don't work. They look great on paper. They're actually a really cool vehicle in terms of what they can do. Great cannon on them, the CTA 40mm. They've got really cool sensors and optics. They're designed in a cool way in that you don't have people popping their heads out the top most of the time. They really only have to do that for pictures. It's all internal, so it's quite well armoured. Blah 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 blah. Except you can't drive them. You can't drive them without the soldiers inside becoming ill. Like, it shakes so violently and is so loud, they get, in some cases, permanent damage to backs, ears, brains, all sorts. It's horrific. How on earth that happened, I have no idea. So, when we're talking about IFVs and recon vehicles, we are probably talking about a brand new replacement for Ajax, because I think they might have to bin it, which would be a huge humiliation, and they will probably do everything in their power to avoid it. But there's only so many times people can lie to the ministers and say they're safe now, and then the minister says on telly, oh, it's safe now, and then, oh, it turns out it's not. And that's happened twice already, I think. It cannot happen a third time. It just can't. If they don't work, or they only work when they're stopped, you have to get out and fix them, which is stupid in an armoured vehicle. I hope I don't have to explain that any further. Yeah, you might have to bin them. In which case, we're looking at a replacement, which is actually, I think, quite exciting, because I think Ajax maybe actually missed a trick. We have other options now. Of course, we can go back to CV90. We could build a brand new version, which is what I'll talk about, because it's probably the more interesting one to talk about. Or we could buy Lynx. This is a German, brand new vehicle. If I was designing Warrior 2, yay, Warrior 2, I design it first as a Warrior, i.e. an infantry fighting vehicle. I wouldn't start with the scout vehicle option. So you make sure it can carry eight squaddies in the back, crew of 3. Very nice. Can fit a whole section in there. I would put an autocannon on it that can elevate and receive targeting data, which I'll come back to in a moment, so that it can potentially shoot air targets, and if possible, with Stanag level 4 protection and like 4A, 4B protection against mines, make sure that it can go in an A400 so that it's air transportable. I don't believe Ajax is air transportable. I don't know if you could do that. That's maybe a bit of a push. You might have to just fall back on it being transportable by Globemasters, in which case I would change the mixture of A400s to Globemasters and buy more Globemasters than I would A400s. But yeah, you make sure that it's air transportable in some form. Autocannon, a missile, so Javelin, potentially, or you could go Martlet. Martlet would be an interesting option, because you can also use that against aircraft. Something along those lines, or Starstreak type things. All very useful. And you go, right, we want to build a production facility for this. You've got 6 months to do the design. I want the first vehicle in 3 years, and I want my 1,400 or 1,400 vehicles plus, because obviously you'd be doing ambulances and artillery and all sorts of fancy stuff with it. I want them, I want first vehicle out in 3, maybe 5 years' time, and then I want you to continually produce them, so that we can, we have a steady drip of replacements. But we're not replacing; we are having to regenerate force. It'd be like full wartime mode. Get on it. That's the domestic option. Obviously, you could just buy CV90s or Lynx instead, or even Bradleys, but I think a European option is probably better suited because they're built for the European environment, and are most likely allies that we'll be working with in that initial window, because remember, we're reinforcement power. They will be probably operating Lynx. They'll probably be operating CV90, so we fit in nicely with their stuff. We can borrow their repair facilities and stuff like that. Interoperability, all good. But yes, potentially we want to build our own for export potential down the line. I don't know. I don't mind, to be honest, whatever you do. But I'll come back to the homegrown vehicle later because I have an idea for it that's quite cool. Artillery systems, we need way more of those. This is the RCH-155, which in this configuration I would give to 1st Division. I think 3rd Division would be better off with a tracked artillery system, personally. But whatever, we need about 120 of those 155mm artillery systems. We do not have a lot of artillery mass at the moment in the British Army after all the AS-90s got retired or sent to Ukraine, which is fine. I don't mind doing that, but we need to have our own artillery units. MLRS M270 is what we currently use. We have a paltry number of them. We need at least 100. Again, these will mainly be going to 3rd Division, with the tube artillery probably mainly going to 1st Division. But it'd be nice to have some tube artillery for 3rd as well. We need way more of these. And the missiles for them as well. So not just the slightly smaller ones. You need the big precision long-range ones as well. PRSM or whatever it's called, the American one that they're working on. Yeah, we need way more artillery, way more. Right. Now let's move on to the bit of a kit that the British Army severely lacks. AA. So what I'm building here, and please bear with me because it's a system of systems approach, which is a stupid term. It's a layered, integrated ground-based air defense system that integrates across the ground forces and obviously would also integrate with force enablers from the RAF, potentially with ships, all helicopters, all that good stuff. But here are the layers. You need a long-range anti-air option. This is a CAM, common anti-air multi-purpose missile, or whatever it's called, aka Land Scepter, but this is the ER, extended range variant. You need 12 of those. Why 12? Well, if we go back to our force structure, we have 4 deployed divisions, in theory. Each one has 3 brigades in it. 4 times 3 is 12. That basically means we have, at the brigade level, a long-range anti-air option. Great. At battalion level, and someone just had a heart attack, I know, seeing that number, and that picture. At battalion level, you want a medium-range anti-air system. That would be regular CAM, aka Land Scepter, aka the Sky Saber system. So this would basically be Sky Saber, but with ER missiles, and this one would be with the regular ones. You want 96. So that is battalion level. So every battalion has a medium-range anti-air missile system, because as you can see, Sky Saber is made of multiple systems. But 96 kits, so that each battalion has a medium-range anti-aircraft option. You also want forward short-range anti-air missiles. This is a Stormer firing Starstreak, but you could take the new one of these, okay, and stick AA missiles on it, short-range ones. So these would be your forward deployed units going along with your armoured push. So you've got these things set up in the back, and you have these going out with your push. Particularly if you use something like Martlet, can also be used anti-vehicle. I think Starstreak can also be used like that. That's what the Stormers could do. So they do have the ability to defend themselves as well, but mostly what they're there to do is to shoot down helicopters, basically. Probably want about 120 of them, so that each brigade has 10 of them that can go with whoever is at the front. Maybe you want to make them more like a Tunguska, with guns as well as missiles, so that you have a counter-drone option, which is the last thing I'm going to talk about. This is a common counter-drone system. This is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this, but this is often what people think of when they think of a counter-UAS system. They're thinking of AAA, anti-aircraft artillery. What I'm talking about is not that. We're going for 96, so this is battalion level, so integrated with the Sky Saber, and it probably would resemble a Sky Saber in that you would have, in fact, you might even be able to integrate this with the Sky Saber units. I just don't know how practical that is. But you have a radar unit, you have a command unit, you have the missile firing units, which would also integrate with these and give data to these short-range AA platforms and something else, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you would also have, I would want redundant command nodes and also detection nodes. So rather than this, which is a big high-end radar and a big command truck, you take your tracked or wheeled unit. I don't mind which. Probably a wheeled unit because it's more rear area. And you combine some more limited command functions with electronic warfare jamming options, and you get about 6 of these for every one big command unit. And then what you'd be able to do is you could build a distributed networked anti-drone, primarily, but also generally anti-air system that also links to a lot of these autocannons, which, if you build one of these, and you have lots of these, or you have the boxes with the guns on them, if you build, if we buy a Lynx, or we build our own, or we buy CV90s, if you make sure that those infantry fighting vehicles, those scout vehicles, all have the ability to receive fire control orders from the counter-drone system, which, remember, includes the big Skysaber radar, but also some forward-deployed multi-role nodes, so they would come along with your... In fact, you could probably build them into the short-range AA vehicles. So imagine this, but with electronic warfare and radar and command and control for the vehicles it's operating nearby to. And you could network the autocannons, so you could get a command coming in if you're sitting in your Warrior 2 or your Lynx or whatever it is. There's a drone over there. You can't see it, but the radar can. Here is the fire data. Lock on with your autocannon and destroy it. Boom. Done. Confirmed. We saw it blow up. Great. Yes, I have a bee in my bonnet about drones. But I think that is for obvious reasons. If you've been anyone who's been following the war in Ukraine will know that the drones are a big thing, and counter-drone systems are very, very important, including the electronic warfare ones, because that forces your enemy to use the fiber optic drone option, which is very fiddly and annoying. And you can shoot them down with all of your autocannons that you have all over the place, which are perfectly capable of firing airburst ammunition, or you design them so that they are. And you don't have to rely on systems like this, because you have loads of systems like this running around. And you just network them all together, and you shoot down all the drones. Right, before I get on to recruitment full on, obviously I've only talked about the more combat-orientated systems for the army. You would need engineer vehicles, probably 120 of them, 80 ambulances, recovery vehicles, probably about 60, command vehicles, not the counter-drone ones, but the regular command vehicles, you probably need about 100. I don't know if they've ordered mortar carriers, but they should probably get some, probably about 120 of them, in either Boxer or Warrior 2 /Ajax /CV90 /Lynx platforms to go along with all the other stuff. So you make sure you have all of that, and we give the army an extra 10 billion a year, same as the RAF, which is basically doubling their budget, and I basically doubled the fighting power of the army. So yeah, or arguably I've increased it from 0 to 1, but yes, we really, really need to sort out the anti-air side as quickly as possible, I would argue, because at the moment, if the British Army deployed, they would have no organic ground-based air defence, which is bad. Right, recruitment. In this section, I will be talking about one of the most commented things, which is there's no point talking about a fantasy fleet, there's no point about increasing the size of the RAF or the army or any of that, because we can't even get enough recruits to keep the current services going. And that is true. Almost. Certainly since COVID, anyway, more people have left the armed forces in the UK than have joined the last 4 years. However, when you look at the numbers, you notice something interesting. Interest in joining the armed forces is actually quite high. And we have a lot of potential recruits. There are 60-odd million people in the UK. I'm only talking about an armed forces of, about 300,000 across the three services, probably less than that. If you were to hazard a guess at how many applicants get actually onto a training course, not complete a training course and actually join the service, but get onto a training course, you would probably make a sensible suggestion. But I'll tell you the actual number. It's 10%. So for every 1,000 applicants that the army gets, only 100 ever start basic training. And basic training dropout rate is about 20% for the army. So you recruit, you get 1,000 people walking into the recruitment office, and the army actually only gets 80 of those joining the army as brand new, squeaky clean privates. Not the best. Not the best. So, there is a lot to fix here. So there is already a lot of fixes in the works for this, and I am very recently, I think yesterday, so on Thursday the 26th of March, there was a report out showing that finally the armed forces intake had gone up. Went up by 13% in 2025 compared to 2024. And for the first time in ages, more recruits are coming into the armed forces than people are leaving it. So they have turned it around, but there's a long, long way to go. So short term, absolutely, the new Armed Forces Recruiting Service is a super, super high priority. It's due to launch next year. The purpose of that is to reduce the time between someone walking into a recruitment office and that person actually being on a course. At the moment, that takes months, sometimes over a year. And by that point, they have found something else to do with their life. They are no longer interested in joining the army. That's why 90% of the recruits, well, maybe not all 90, because some are medically unable to do it, but that is a huge amount of those people are just, no, I can't be bothered. I've got a job in the co-op now. I'm not, and I've settled down. I've found a partner and I'm starting a family. Like, whatever it is, they're not interested anymore. So, quite rightly, they want to get the time down. The target is quite ambitious, actually. 10 days between you walking in and being told that, yes, you can start on a course, and 30 days total to actually start on a course. So within 1 month of going into the recruitment centre, you're told relatively quickly, yes, we'd love to have you. You've passed your medical. Here's your course. It starts in a couple of weeks. That's the aim. And that will make a huge difference. So yes, absolutely. Carry on with that. I would argue you need to improve pay, particularly for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. You need to improve conditions, and you need to improve housing for all armed forces personnel. And that is something that is already being identified. That is something that is already being done. But I think it needs to be hammered home. You need to fix all that stuff. You need to do it for the whole stack, not just combat troops, but support personnel and things like that, to fix your retention on the other side of it. Longer term, obviously we're going to need to, if you're following my plan, it's going to need to scale up to meet the demands of the increased size of the armed forces. I'm not planning on doing it overnight. As I said, this is looking out to 2050. So, once we've got it fixed, then it's more like, well, let's get as many people in the door as we can. And then when we get to the right sort of size, it moves to more of a maintenance phase. Right. The other comment that I got a lot of, and it's a fair comment, is finances. Where is the money coming from? So, as I said at the start, this is assuming 3.5% of the UK's GDP is spent on defence. That is around £110 billion per year, currently in 2025, 2026. That is an increase of £50 billion a year, and as I have said through the video, 20 of that is going to the Navy, 10 of that is going to the Army, 10 of that is going to the RAF, and 10 of it is going into industrial capacity to build factories and shipyards and invest in apprenticeships and all that good stuff. That is not, historically speaking, a particularly high percentage. If you look at UK defence spending over the last little while, it was about 7% in 1960, and I don't think it dropped below 4% during the Cold War, so up to 1989. Then in the 90s, it dropped a little bit, but was about 3.5%. And then it started going down and down and down. I think it reached the bottom in it was quite recent as well. But anyway, sometime in the 2010s, it dipped below 2%, and they'd also started doing all of the nonsense accountant trickery and counting things as defence spending when they weren't historically, like pensions or the War Graves Commission, stuff like that, to make the numbers sound better. It has been creeping up, and I believe in 2024 it was 2.4%, and in 2025 it was 2.5%. I am talking about jumping up to 3.5%. That is a big increase, and I have only really considered actual military spending, so I'm pretty much doubling what the actual spend is on frontline defence, which, yeah, pans out. That is pretty much how much I've costed things up as doing. I'm focusing on industrial regeneration and logistics and key capabilities immediately, and probably all the way through the 2030s. And then the full force structure, I'm not expecting this to come through with my numbers until 2050. But we will be building up towards it, 2050. So it's a fairly long-term investment. That is in 2025, 2020, early 2026 prices, 50 billion a year for 25 years. Oh, that is £1.25 trillion by 2050 put into defence. That's a lot of money. It's not the NATO aim of 5%. This is only on 3.5%. And a key thing that Britain has got wrong with defence spending is that 3.5% that the government loves to talk about is a promise. And it's a promise by 2035. Except the next election is before then. I think the next election is in 2029. So they don't have to stick to it, because it's no guarantees or promises by a previous government can hold down the hands of the next one is a common thing in British kind of political reality and convention. So, if one government says, yes, we'll build 4 aircraft carriers, the next one can say, no, we're only going to build 2. And there's no recourse for the MOD. So what I would do, I would put the Defence Investment Plan and the Strategic Defence Review and all that together in a long-term package, and I would pass it as primary legislation. Primary legislation that says you cannot drop defence spending below 3.5%, and you must maintain these capabilities. You must be able to deploy 1 division, a heavy division, to Eastern Europe at a moment's notice to fight a war with a peer adversary. The RAF has to consider fighting a peer adversary, and the Navy has to be able to have a carrier, an amphibious group, nuclear deterrent, and defend the UK and all the rest of it against a peer adversary, which means you would get the kind of numbers that I'm talking about in this plan anyway. And that is a hard flaw. And you pass it in primary legislation, because then subsequent governments are tied to it. Because if they do drop the funding, or they do drop key capabilities outlined in the Act, well, then they can be challenged legally, and they can be forced to do it by the courts. And obviously it would be politically very embarrassing, and this secures it no matter which political party gets in, unless they go to the effort of trying to repeal the Act, which is considerably more difficult than just going back on a promise or pretending you never made the promise in the first place. or pretending you're meeting the promise when you're not. So that is what I would do in terms of the finances. Now, is it practical to raise that extra 50 billion quid? Yes, is the short answer. Historically, we have had no problem doing it. But fair enough, particularly if you're a UK viewer, you are used to the government saying they don't have any money to do anything. Well, how does the government get money to do stuff? Well, the simple answer there is tax. Now, I am not a tax expert. I am not trying to lay out government tax policy. I am just going to lay out some options that HMRC could use to get more money for themselves, which they love doing, so I don't see any problems. First thing you could do, you could set the top income tax band to, which is a marginal band, by the way. So any income you earn past £100,000 a year, we are going to take 65% of that as income tax, and we're also going to increase enforcement of anyone who lies in that tax bracket. You would generate an extra 40 billion a year right off the bat. So that's most of us done. You could raise corporation tax to 30% and cut down on the various loopholes that multinationals use to hide all of their profits. You could even go be extreme and use a revenue tax, corporate revenue tax, but that's probably unlikely. But you could increase corporation tax to 30%, which is still pretty reasonable, and you'd raise an extra 10 billion a year from that. There we go. That's my plan funded. But it's always nice to have a contingency or other options. You could bring capital gains tax into alignment with income tax. That would generate you about £12 billion. You could reform council tax, property tax, to be more weighted towards extremely expensive properties, because property prices in the UK are ridiculous at the moment. You would get 12 billion out of that, stamp duty, stuff like that. You could introduce a land value tax, potentially. That's something that has been mooted a few times. Probably get 7 billion from that. You could increase inheritance tax reform, lower the thresholds, close loopholes, etc., etc. And that gets you another 7 billion. You could expand national insurance. Not the rate, but you could say, look, if you're getting income from stocks and shares and stuff like that, you could say, well, that's national insurance contribution liable, so you could probably get another 6 billion out of that. And I've just detailed about £100 billion a year of tax increases that you could do for fairly low political blowback. Because all of those are targeting people who have pots and pots of money, rather than people down at the other end. That's just my personal take on it. I'm sure other people have ways that they would want to do it. Maybe they want to do it through cuts. It's not something I personally would do, but you could cut other programs to make sure that the money is available for defence. That's way more unpopular. And the only one that is vaguely popular to cut, which I hear a lot, is to cut the foreign aid budget. I think the Labour government even did that. The problem is foreign aid budget is, very, very small. I think it was cut from 0.9 to 0.3% of GDP. It's tiny. And the other problem with it is A, good PR, and B, it's how we bribe other countries to do things that we want them to do, such as voting with us in the UN. Or voting for us to host the Olympics and stuff like that. That's what that money is used for. Apologies if you think it's all fun, nice, and altruistic. It's not. A lot of it is used to bribe other countries to do stuff for us, which is an extremely useful thing to do, because it's much better to just go, hey, do you want £100 million, rather than having to persuade them with force. It's much better to persuade them with honey, because usually cheaper for us in the long run. And even so, even if you completely cut the foreign aid budget, it would not go anywhere near close to funding the full defence spend that we're talking about here. That's not really an option. You would have to cut something that is more popular. And basically every government department in the UK has been cut back to the bone already, for years and years. Basically, ever since 2008, everything has been cut back. So there's no real room for cuts, and I don't think people would stand for cuts. You've got to raise taxes. Well, nobody likes that either, but at least you can say, well, we're only increasing taxes on super rich people who can afford it anyway. Politically, that's probably the easiest way to sell it, particularly as a lot of the money that we're raising here in defence spending is going back into the economy as investment in shipbuilding, investment in people, education and skills and apprenticeships and stuff like that, all of which is very, very popular. So, yeah, we're taking money away from people who have lots of it to, rob the rich to feed the poor. That's the basic approach here, which is usually popular enough that you can sell it, or at least not lose out. Anyway, now, if you've gotten to this point in the video, congratulations. There are some weaknesses to this plan. Some serious weaknesses that I cut on purpose, because to include them would include serious costs that would push it up above the 3.5%. I'm already kind of skirting what is possible with 3.5%. I really don't have any slack in the system, which is in itself a weakness, but there is a little bit. Some of the numbers could come down slightly, or things could be cut. I would prefer not, but yeah, things like the SSGNs and extra submarines and things like that. You could tweak the numbers maybe a little bit. However, there are some weaknesses to this system. The first one, ballistic missile defense is intermittent, it's not persistent, and it relies on the destroyers from the Navy. So it is vulnerable to being saturated. Okay, yes, we've got the expendable VLS layer, but yeah, it could be saturated due to an attack. So that also requires a destroyer hangs around the UK if we ever think we need that, and can only cover one bit of the UK at a time. Yeah, it's not great. You could build a land-based ballistic missile defense system covering the UK. That's not cheap. That's 15 billion minimum, and maybe 500 million a year to keep it going. Make sure you have the missiles and the serviced and tested and personnel to run it and all that sort of stuff. That ain't cheap. And that's a low-end estimate. So we have no real ballistic missile defense in terms of like a proper good, maybe not even Iron Dome level, but, a potential ballistic missile defense system. I haven't included one for cost reasons. That is a weakness. Another weakness, there's no dedicated crewed electronic warfare platform for the RAF. There's no Growler. There's no, what's the E6 equivalent. This is something we would have to rely on the Americans to provide. Or, as I said in the RAF section, we'd have to rely on windows of suppression rather than total electronic control. You have jamming pods on the F-35s. You have the loyal wingman drones, which hopefully have electronic warfare. But if we wanted a crude electronic warfare platform, a sovereign one, that would mean including it in the Tempest build and adding a Tempest variant that has electronic warfare control. You're probably looking at 3, possibly more billion to add that in, because you're going to have a huge amount of development costs for that. So that is another weakness that I have not included. Electronic warfare control, like a little bit, as much as I think I can get away with, but there's no like US style total shutdown stuff going on. Another one, which I talked about in the RFA section, is the heavy lift transport assumes that we have uncontested sea lanes, and we were able to pre-position tanks and stuff in, say, Germany or wherever. If we built those extra Ro-Ros and kept the 12 extra ones and kept them in RFA service, sitting around in case we needed them, rather than having a list of ships that we can yoink. You're talking about another 3.5 billion quid. I think that's a fairly easy one to cut, because you can go for the 6 dedicated and 12 emergency uptake ones. But yeah, if you had all 18 ships in RFA service that were, contracted out when they weren't being used, but to get a bit of cash in. But yeah, that's a big capital cost to actually get them. And the last one is ISR. It's pretty vulnerable to degradation if there are losses to the high-end assets. That is something the UK is already working on. We would probably want UAV, ISR, the digital targeting web. All of this stuff is already being considered. But I think the important thing is you've got to have graceful degradation of the digital targeting web built in as an assumption when you are doing it. And I'm not sure they've done that. So you have to assume, because if you don't, it really is weakness. You have to assume, well, what happens if we don't have any E7s over the area? Because, well, practically, because we haven't built enough, because we've only got 3 of the things. But let's say we weren't playing my 9, but the one that was operating over this part of the battlefield, that one has been shot at and has had to... We're no longer able to keep it airborne 24/7. Does the ISR network degrade gracefully? Do we have a lot of fallback onto the F-35s, their loyal wingmen, UAVs? Is that all built in and automatic filtering down? Much as the same way that I want the ground-based air defence to degrade gracefully. So it's not a huge problem if the central command units get taken out. It does degrade effectiveness, but it doesn't completely eliminate anything, and everyone's blind. And there we go. I don't know how long this video is. Probably very long. If you would like to know more, there are lots of places you can go to find out about UK defence spending. I would recommend Dr. Alexander Clark and his nearly 4-hour epic rant just about the Royal Navy. So if you thought I talked for a long time, please go and check out any of his videos. Actually, they're all very good. But that one in particular, I will provide links down in the description to all of these things that I'm talking about. Navy Lookout, both the website and their YouTube channel. They have an article up about Britain wakes up to the condition of its Navy, which is an interesting read. That is basically, we told you so. They also have their YouTube channel, which has some cool videos of British ships on it, quite a lot. There is a paper by Dr. Peter Roberts from, I think, Exeter University, who's ex-Royal Navy, talking about how Royal Navy leadership has allowed this bad situation to develop and what they need to do to change it. I didn't really talk about leadership in this video at all. But yeah, that is also something that needs looked at. You can go and read the 2025 Strategic Defence Review if you can skim through all the jargon in it to see that this plan really is just going off what they say they want to be able to do in that, but with actual numbers. If you're more interested in just generally hearing about UK defence stuff, there's the UK Defence Journal, there's BFBS Forces News, they have a website, and BFBS also have a YouTube channel here. And if you're interested in just naval stuff in general, naval defence news from around the world, including Europe, Naval News, who also have a YouTube channel. All great stuff. Well, there we go. I've been talking for long enough. If you made it to the end of the video, goodness me, leave a comment. Yeah, let me know your thoughts. Is this the force plan that sounds about right to you? Or have I gotten it completely wrong? Let me know. Or, if you're not a UK viewer, what would your country do with a 3.5% defence spend? Or what do you think they should be looking to provide on that? I'd be very curious to know. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and well, I'll see you again, probably not soon, but I probably will see you again for a video like this. But if not, I'll see you soon for some Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, maybe some Sea Power. Bye for now.